Up, we're going to have another conversation with an operator and a startup, another case study. So from Parallel Wireless and Everything Everywhere, we have Mansoor Hanif and Steve Papa. Mansoor and Steve. You gotta start go straight to slides.
Hello everyone, can you hear me? Yeah? Mic's on? Well, thanks for the invite, Derek. So we're here from the UK. So first of all, I'll start with a few words about who we are, because I know we're not that very well known in the US. And it's EE, by the way, now, no longer Everything Everywhere.
Oh, I'm locked in the old days.
Times move fast. So first of all, I think I've skipped a slide here. There we go. Yeah, there we go. So first of all, for those of you who don't know us, EE is born of a merger between T-Mobile and Orange. So T-Mobile US, you know who they are, owned by Deutsche Telekom, the German telecoms operator. And Orange, and I believe we have some colleagues from Orange today. So in 2010, Orange in the UK and T-Mobile in the UK merged 50-50 to create Everything Everywhere, which was our old name, as Derek is referring to. And so I arrived in around 2011, and my first job was to integrate the two networks. We had two 2G networks, two 3G networks, a shared network with H3G, and our goal was to launch 4G and rebrand to EE, which was really underpinning our new brand. And the brand is all about innovation, and that's why I'm really pleased to be here today and talk about what we're doing on innovation and what we need from you. So who are we? We're number one now in the UK. Orange and T-Mobile were third and fourth. And together we're number one since the last 3 to 4 years, with over 30 million subscribers in the UK. Population is around 60 million in the UK, so quite a big part of the market. That includes a lot of MVNOs. We've got about 40 MVNOs. We've got a lot of B2B and about 25 million consumers. We are also number one in Europe for 4G, which we're very proud of. We were very, very late in 4G compared to the US and Asia in particular. So the UK was, I think, 54th in the world to launch 4G, which was quite shameful for us engineers who love networks. So we're really pleased now that I believe we are now number 4 in the world as a country for subscribers on 4G. And we just hit around 12 million subscribers, so you can see about 45–50% of our base after we launched 4G coverage in 2012. So we have about 18,500 macro sites running on our network. Those have been merged. Over the last 3 years, we've also been switching off a lot of sites. We switched off about 8,500 to bring our EBITDA up, and quite a hard thing to do if you're decommissioning and launching new services at the same time. And we are also currently under acquisition. We are being acquired by BT for the sum of 12.5 billion. That's just going through regulatory approval. So up till now, until we get the announcement from the Competition and Mergers Authority, we're still very much two separate companies. But the potential of BT and E together is huge, obviously, so I'm quite excited about it, but obviously we have to wait until the decision, which is due by the end of this year. And here you have some of the points that we've raised in our kind of manifesto for the next 3 years. This is our current plan of investment, which is totally independent of the acquisition by BT. So we've got £1.5 billion already signed off by our shareholders as part of the deal. And that won't change with the acquisition. And these are the kind of things we're trying to do with that. So we already mentioned about pushing really hard on 4G. I believe we'll get to 60–70% of our base by the end of this year. We're close to 93% population coverage on 4G now, which is really fast actually if you think that we just launched 2 to 3 years ago. So we're putting a lot of effort on that. We're very much involved in 5G as well. We're the platinum founders of the 5G Innovation Center in Surrey with a lot of other partners. But we don't want to wait necessarily for 5G to come before we innovate. I think there's a lot of the 5G use cases we can do today. We're very focused on customer-centric operations. We're not very good, to be honest, in dealing with our customers. Customer service is poor, and it's getting better. We put a lot of effort on getting it better. The network has improved. But customer service, everything we do is focused on improving customer service, and it's one of our key goals. Everything we do needs to be seamless for the customer. That's why we launched voice over Wi-Fi over IMS, similar to what T-Mobile US launched here as a pioneer. And that's totally seamless for the customer, and it's the same with all the other services we do. Whether that's increasing speeds through carrier aggregation, we have 300 meg service on LTE with carrier aggregation now live on 1,000 sites in the UK, and we're switching on more sites every day. We've also trialed the next phase of carrier aggregation, 3 carriers, earlier this year, where we reached about 410 megabits throughput. So you can see there's a long way that we can still stretch 4G and LTE advanced over the next 3 to 4 years. We call it a stairway to heaven, where you can put on layer after layer of network performance and capacity before you really need to go to 5G. And one of the things we'll be talking about today is what we're doing on voice and coverage as well. We're extending our coverage into the rural areas with 800 megahertz VoLTE. We're switching on VoLTE now in these coming weeks. And we've worked a lot with Steve here in Parallel Wireless to introduce new solutions which allow us to go into really remote villages of 30 houses or so in a very cost-effective way. We'll come back to that in a minute. So here I'd like to talk a little bit about what we call the edge of the network, and it can mean everything or nothing to anybody. But for us, you know, I'm in charge of the RAN, the radio access networks in EE over the last 3 years. So we see ourselves as living on the edge. It's the edge of the network where you're closest to the customer, where you're very close to the device. And that can be through small cells, it can be through, you heard about set-top boxes there from Bouygues just earlier. That's also the edge of the network from the fixed side. And it's somewhere where there's a lot of blurring going on today, and that's a real focus for us. And I would define, there's 2 edges to the network. In the urban areas, we have the edge of the network indoor, where we're getting very close to the end customer, and that's a very privileged position to be in. And you heard from Bouygues what kind of things you can do on the edge of the network in the fixed world, even more in the mobile world. But if you take what we call mobile edge computing, which is putting computing power into the radio network, or even virtualizing the whole core network and putting it into the edge of the network, whether that's a small cell, whether that's a femtocell, whether it's a macro, there's a huge amount of innovation you can do there to provide value for the customer. If you put that together with open source networking, where we can actually move much faster and provide a lot more creativity and innovation much quicker, and the Internet of Things, I think it's a triple whammy. Any one of those 3 things together is already innovative, but putting them together in a very coherent way is hugely powerful. So I think we're doing a lot of work on that. I just came straight yesterday from the Mobile Edge Congress in the UK. So there's a lot of traction there. On the rural side, though, we have to make sure as operators, you can't really innovate if you don't get the basics right. You really got to get the basics right. And that means coverage everywhere. It means performance. It means reliability of the network. And it's one of the things we're very keen on. I've been set a challenge by our CEO to reach 100% coverage of our network, 100% everywhere across the whole country, whether that's indoor, outdoor, whether it's in your basement, anywhere. So that's why I'm here today to call for innovation to help us to do that. Steve is one of our partners who's helping us. The kind of things we're looking at there is satellite backhaul. There's a huge amount of innovation there to actually lower the cost of satellite backhaul, even for 4G. We're doing a proof of concept now at the moment in Scotland. In-band backhaul, that's where Steve's solution comes in. Mesh small cell, again, it's a part of Steve's solution. Low-cost macros, and I think that's where open source networks can really help us to break the current high-cost system to lower the cost in really remote areas where you need to be much more cost-effective. So you have that network edge as well. So it's really hard to define the key priorities when you want to innovate on everything, but if I was to say those 3 things, it's really getting the basics right for our customers. You heard from Derek earlier about value. The value for our customer is coverage, number 1. You have to have coverage everywhere, indoor, outdoor. Reliability, critical communications. We are now bidding for emergency services in the UK. We're the last bidder. Hopefully we'll find out next week whether we won. Even though we're the last bidder, they may choose to go backwards. We don't know. Fingers crossed. And it's like the first call here, first responder networks, where they're going to put it over our commercial 4G network. So it has to be absolutely 100% reliable. We will have no dedicated spectrum. So our network has to be fit for critical communications. It has to be the most reliable network in the world over the next 3 years. And that's quite exciting because we know we have a long way to go there. So first of all, coverage, mesh small cells, low cost, low maintenance macros, what we call air masts, whether that's balloons, whether that's drones. whether that's with satellites, satellite backhaul over small cells. Reliability, again, satellite backhaul plays a big part there. Transmission resilience, self-healing networks, rapid intervention vehicles, device-to-device to stretch our coverage. All of those things we're actively engaged on. We're actively trialing several of those technologies. And performance and value at the edge of the network, that's where we come to mobile edge computing, open source networks, Internet of Things, and LTE broadcast, EMBMS. Those are the technologies where we believe we can improve our performance of our network, but also give value to our customers and then monetize that. And with that, a little bit about parallel wireless. So our mentality, as you know, has been, as you've seen, is quite pioneering. We're quite focused on network differentiation and innovating around that. And that's why we've had a meeting of minds with Steve and his team. They've been hugely innovative. We believe their solution is the only one that actually meets our challenge. The challenge I gave to all our partners was, we've got a reasonable amount of spectrum across the whole country. How can I use that to maximum benefit even in the really remote rural areas? 2600 megahertz, for example, nobody was planning to do anything with that in the rural areas. And Steve came with an answer of how we could use that same spectrum to hop along and mesh together small cells. So Steve's going to talk a little bit about that right now. Okay?
Yeah, so nice to be here. Just really quick. What we're trying to do is make cellular as cost-effective to deploy and easy to deploy as Wi-Fi. We all know, we talk about 5G as being a dense het net. We already have a representative example of a dense het net, which is Wi-Fi. And so when the cost starts approaching Wi-Fi, you're going to see a lot more coverage and capacity. So we're trying to pioneer a lot of that work. What's interesting is that in order to do that, it's no one place that you need to innovate. You need to innovate across all of the interfaces in the radio network. And if you look at some of the recognition we've got over the past year, you'll see people talking about what we're doing as SDN, LTE core, backhaul, access, NFV. At the core of it is network function virtualization, where we're not just taking existing interfaces and virtualizing them, we're integrating them in new ways. We're taking the data plane and the signaling plane and we're bringing them together to enable new superpowers in the network. So the result is so that you could deploy cells like you're deploying Wi-Fi access. So you might have to do, even Wi-Fi, we do RF planning, right? You go in your house, you decide, do I put it in the middle of the house? Do I put it, in the basement? Obviously, with a cellular network, there's more advanced planning. But for the rest of it, you just plug it in. And that's what we're looking to make the HetNet that easy to deploy. So,
great. A lot of good fodder there to carry on the discussion. So essentially, British Telecom's got everything everywhere. I'm lumping you together a little too quickly, legally speaking. So EE has a pretty good coverage throughout the country, but there's all these outcroppings of people living in these small towns and things like that. And you guys are striving to really deliver good connectivity to all those regions. Mm-hmm. First of all, what's the push for that? Is there a regulatory push, like you have to do it, or because these are small markets from an economic point of view, right?
Yep. That's what makes it so difficult to be cost effective. So these are villages of about 30 people. Yeah. But there's at least 5,000 to 7,000 villages out there. So we announced publicly that over the next 3 years we'd cover 1,500 of them. There is a regulatory push since last year that we have a 90% geographical coverage obligation, which was new. But that's not really where people live. That's the mountains in Scotland where there's only sheep and there's not even any roads there to measure. Yep. So satellite backhaul is great for that because you've got no traffic there. Yep. So you just put a small cell with satellite backhaul. You don't need to worry about the cost because there's no traffic. So that's driving us, but really it's the challenge from Olaf, who really believes the network should be everywhere. Yep. The problem we have in the UK is that the legislation is quite tough on us. And over the last 15 years, it's been very difficult to deploy antennas in these areas. People didn't want them. And the antenna heights are very low compared to other areas, which means that
you probably have a few of these 30 people who want the connectivity, a few who go, don't put an antenna in my town.
It's exactly. 10 years ago, the majority didn't want them, and the minority did. Yep. The same villages now is the majority wants it, and the minority don't. Right. So we've got to change something there. So when you talk about dropping a satellite, what we're talking about is a town that's quite remote. You would do a satellite backhaul and serve that town through, up through the sky. But what we're talking about with parallel wireless is the ability to mesh over to that town and kind of extend your network through a series of what, Steve?
We call them microcell networks.
Yep.
Right? The idea is if we virtualize the interfaces, we can make a series of small devices stitched together very effectively as one, comprehensive coverage umbrella.
So what we're seeing in one of the pictures that's still up there with the guy in the turquoise shirt, the helmet, what's he installing on the side of that building, and how does that work?
In that case, he's installing one of our first generation, we call them converged wireless systems,
Yep.
which is both an access point, but also the edge router is sort of integrated in there,
Yep.
which allows us to have a multi-home backhaul.
Yep.
And that multi-home backhaul is, if there is wired backhaul, we'll plug it in. Otherwise, we're meshing from other cells,
Yep.
all the way from a donor cell from the macro. We'll do that over both unlicensed, which we call unlicensed assist,
Yep.
as well as over licensed spectrum, ultimately.
And Mansoor mentioned in-band, so you're going to be using the same frequencies you use for the cell phones to do some of the backhaul, is that correct?
Correct. Yep.
And that basically, overcomes some of the spectrum limitations that you might otherwise have, right?
Yeah, there's two ways we can use in-band. Today we're using it. What Steve does basically is his mesh cell will calculate what's the best coverage coming from a macro cell.
Yeah.
It will take some of that in-band bandwidth
Yep.
and use it for backhaul. And it will actually package up the other cells through that. Now, if we need more bandwidth on that, we can actually upgrade it because we got we've got the capability to do that. Between the small cells today, you're using public Wi-Fi spectrum because the chips are cheaper.
Yep.
But as we go to the future, also for the in-band, the mesh between the small cells, you could use 2600 or any other spectrum.
I mean, and Mansoor, you're giving me such rich area that I'd like to have like half an hour to start talking about balloons and drones and the things you mentioned there.
I would mention one thing about the balloon there. I mean, the whole point about Steve's solution is the mesh.
Yes.
Smart mesh. And you can put that small cell, imagine if it was just to fly off that wall and go up in a balloon.
Yeah.
It would still be a mesh. It's the same solution.
Right.
One thing we could do, one thing we're looking at doing is having a tethered balloon where you can actually go up 30, 40 meters.
Yeah.
It finds the nearest macro, and then it can actually transmit coverage. Yeah?
So if you get better range out of that balloon cell, and lower cost of the equipment, because one balloon covers the whole town versus meshing around.
SoftBank in Japan is already using that with repeaters,
Yeah.
but if you put the mesh in there, actually, you don't even need to repeat. You can actually mesh it in, and then you can also, anything that moves, whether that's trains, whether that's ships, whether that's planes, you can use the same technology.
Brilliant. All right, so I want to go down that road, but we don't have time. We've got to talk about the partnership specifically. So first off, how did the two companies meet?
So we had been exploring some of the National Public Safety Network in the UK.
Yep.
And we're spending time in the UK, and literally serendipitously at a conference like this, I sat next to the CEO of EE.
Yeah.
And we started the conversation, and Mansoor and I were introduced.
Yeah.
We started looking at how could we jointly innovate to solve some of these tough requirements for public safety.
Right.
And that discussion expanded into rural. I mean, I don't know what you want to add to that.
No, absolutely. I mean, this is the rural application, but Steve is also working on the emergency services side as well.
Right.
Where there's kind of a double relationship there. Pretty much the same platform. But the key thing about the mesh, apart from actually improving the coverage even when you're moving, is that it's highly reliable as well. So if you're meshed to two, if you've got 3 or 4 and they're meshed to 2 macros, if one of them goes down,
Right.
you've got
Well, that's one of the upsides of mesh, clearly, is this redundancy and also, as you said, moving things can immediately be added to the mesh in real time and then taken out as they move through. So it has some great flexibility, and the way you deploy it in these towns demonstrates that. But then the downside is, as you get to multiple hops, you start building up the latency. So are you finding that as an issue, and how do you overcome? Because we heard, if I look back at prior TC3 year slides, 2011 will be mesh, but then the latency issues started kind of bringing down the fame of that idea. But here we are seeing it deployed in an economical way. So how'd you overcome it?
A lot of first generation mesh had a host of limitations. Now when you use a true multi-radio mesh, I mean, using really commodity radios, you're talking $20 parts, you're getting a millisecond latency for each hop, right? It's not really that problematic.
And the multi-band aspect allows it to not lose bandwidth as it goes through the...
Well, the multi-radio, yes. You're completely reusing the spectrum on each hop.
Is it the economics? Is it the cost of having multi-radio and the cost of having the processing, the forwarding plane to do all that has come down?
That, and because they're off-the-shelf parts, we can integrate it all into one place.
Yep.
It's the integration where you get a lot of savings, right?
Yep.
If you have 5 different boxes, right, each of those, then you're using expensive people on the ground, plugging in cables between these things, diagnosing problems. I got to go to all these different boxes. The more and more you bring together, it becomes more like the consumer experience. You plug it in and you don't worry about it.
So these are still EE installed devices, or is Parallel also working as a service installer in the partnership?
We're jointly working with local partners in the UK to do that. Again, by driving down the skill set required to do that, you open up the universe of potential people that can do that work.
So we're still selecting.
Sorry?
So I was just saying we're just selecting partners for the installation, and one of the things we're looking at is satellite dish installers.
Yep.
To show how we can get the cost down.
Yep. So it's never going to go all the way to consumer self-install to kind of put a mesh around their town, right?
Unlikely. I mean, you could look at that. You could look at it in really remote areas where actually in the UK some people build their own fiber because they can't get any other way.
Yep.
So we could look at that in really remote areas, but I think there's enough partners out there who could do this job.
I mean, there's plenty of this. Like, I think even the satellite, consumers could self-install, but we found in industry the right place is a series of local people and trucks that can go out and do these somewhat complicated, medium complicated installs.
Lightweight RF plan.
Right. So, and I'll let Mansoor, you touched on that point that keeps coming up, and that you're trying to build coverage, and coverage doesn't necessarily represent significant revenue, but you're creating value, and then hope to derive revenue long term. These small hamlets all around, is there great opportunity as you aggregate 1,500? You said this year, I think. As you aggregate them up, is there a way of developing revenues from that?
Yeah, I think I think the revenue from a 30-village hamlet is limited.
Yeah.
So what we're doing is we're trying to also replace, in some cases, the fixed broadband with the mobile broadband and the voice.
Yep.
But we really need to be cost-effective. It's the cost-effectiveness of this which is going to be key, and it's 4 to 5 times cheaper than a macro cell there. But in the future, I believe, what we don't see here is the knock-on effect of people moving around the country, and knowing that you've got the best coverage from a single operator is going to give us a knock-on effect across the whole of our...
It's true, that, and I think the US parallel to that, not parallel wireless, but the US analogy to that is how there's many customers that subscribe to an AT&T or Verizon because of the perceived need. Well, I need national coverage, and these people maybe leave their hometown or their home area 1 week per year, and so really they could benefit by a cheaper plan maybe, but they have the perceived desire. They just want to have that insurance, to have it covered.
Absolutely. There's value in being the best network or the best coverage and reliability.
One thing that's counterintuitive with what we're doing is, even though we're drawing backhaul from the macro, we're creating capacity because we're converting edge users right, into very high-speed, high-QAM users onto the macro.
Is there any amount of compression that's happening there, or is it just by aggregating them and keeping them off the noisy chatter aspect?
Yeah, literally by moving someone. So as you get when you have 1 bar on your phone, you're using a lot more spectrum.
Right.
So we're moving all those users in their homes to 5-bar signals.
You're saving their battery at the same time.
Saving their batteries, but now the macro is it's much more efficient.
Right.
And should we get enough fixed broadband users, we can always add a point-to-point backhauling.
So basically, you're kind of that cell edge problem. You're kind of removing that, having one powerful repeater versus a weak handset to send it back and receive a strong signal. You don't get as many repeats and resets, right? So last question on the partnership development process. You talked about meeting at a conference, having some luck in terms of who you sat beside, a good person, passed you on to Mansoor. How long does it take for you to get into, see a proof of concept with EE?
Well, in our case, it had a lot to do where we were in our product development cycle.
Yeah, it sounds like there was a lot of fortuitous.
It was very fortuitous. It was earlier than we planned on engaging with the market, right? And so it was just literally it was luck that we met. It was in our first discussions were in August, and I think we were doing a first joint demonstration for a number of interested parties by November. But it was very much lab prototypes. I think what was great is Mansoor and his team understood where we were in our development, so they weren't scared when we came up with plastic boxes with lots of boards in them and wires and whatnot, whereas a lot of carriers would look at that as a lab project.
So Mansoor, you have a long carrier background, right?
20 years, yeah.
So when somebody comes in with a bunch of boxes, they don't have a big E on the side or anything polished and look great. How were you able to look at that as something that had promise versus, well, that's looks like something Wozniak hacked up when he was 20 years old, with a kazoo on the top. Like, how were you comfortable with that level of development?
Well, personally, I've always been. I've been 20 years in telecoms, and we're just too slow, way too slow. So, any concept that has got value, we're looking into it. And this one in particular, the delays were on our side because just to get everybody on board and get the trials going takes too long. So I think as we go forward, I'm hoping that this example to our shareholders as well, who have been looking at this very carefully, understand that we need to have these cycles of development and innovation, which are much faster and much closer to what the OTTs require for us to partner with them, because we need to convince them to come through the middle of our networks rather than over the top. And we need to be that fast. So what's really exciting is on the edge of the network, you can take more risks. And you can, on this project, I said to our management, our shareholders, if we fail, I take the rap, and that's fine, because you need to be able to fail and re-innovate. You know, we don't want to fail, but you need to be able to take the risk to fail, to innovate quickly. So I'm hoping on the edge of the network we can go much faster because you're going to have localized, controlled environments for testing.
So, you know, if we take everything you say at face value, it sounds like you and your technology group have a very, you know, one of the cultures that we would love to see more of and embrace. How did you get there? I mean, you as an individual, maybe you're a tech enthusiast for the past 20 years. How did you get your whole group, like your CEO, to see similar? Think, oh, this is a good idea. I'll have Mansoor talk about it. How deep does that run, and how did you guys get there?
Well, we're very lucky to have a CEO who loves networks. I mean, that's the reason why I came to EE, because he said, look, I want to build the best network in the world, and I want to change the infrastructure of this country. So that's why I came there. So, you know, he's got that mentality. He gave me a personal challenge saying you've got to reach 100% coverage everywhere. So, you know, we built on that. So we're very lucky to have that backing. Of course, we got a very complicated governance with 2 shareholders. It took a lot of time for to get everybody's backing. But I believe there's more and more focus on network differentiation. Now, networks are back in vogue. They weren't a few years ago. And I'm hoping to see more CEOs with that same kind of dynamism as
what you're saying is great. Like, and here's my next tweet when I get a chance to sit down. But you're saying you need to build a good enough network so that the content providers want to go through the middle, not over the top. And that is a brilliant piece of information. I think it's like, do you want to be a dumb pipe? No, I want to be a brilliant pipe. Because in so doing, I create tremendous value.
Differentiation.
And I can go back to an OTT player and say, I have something to offer here.
Absolutely agree, because I often say that, because I think the whole debate about fighting with OTTs is just stale and it's just gone. What we need to do is to get them to cooperate with us. I mean, they're looking for the value. They're looking for the best networks, devices and OTTs. And if you provide good value and a great network, you can actually convince them to come and work with you through the middle of the network, because there's much more value in the network than over.
You won't capture 100% of the revenue, but you get a piece. And you get a piece of the
pie is big enough for everybody.
And as it grows, you can grow as well. Brilliant. Oh, that sounds great. Steve, congratulations on the deal. Hope the build-out continues to go very well. And thank you both, Mansoor and Steve. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right.